Thus, the users, like the managers, can be viewed as players in interactive games. In particular, with this perspective, it's natural to think of the users as having expectations in relation to the future value of the domestic currency, compared either with real assets, foreign currencies, or indices of cost. These expectations may or may not be well-founded or rational, but they will inevitably guide or influence the choices made by the users.
Сейчас признание того факта, что пользователи валюты становятся своего рода игроками в своего рода игре, и у них есть определенные стратегии, с помощью которых они могут оптимизировать свои решения, согласно которым их экономические интересы ведут к признанию того, что задачи центральных менеджеров государства не настолько просты, как кажется на первый взгляд, и это несравнимо с тем, например, как быть пастухом и так далее. Таким образом, пользователи, так же как и менеджеры, могут рассматриваться как игроки в интерактивных играх. В частности, с этой точки зрения, естественно, думать, что пользователи имеют какие-то свои ожидания в зависимости от стоимости их валюты в стране, где они проживают, в сравнении с активами, различными иностранными валютами или индексами. Эти ожидания могут и не быть рациональными, но тем не менее они действуют и влияют на тот выбор, который делается пользователями.
I'm realizing that I have to skip some of this. The total, it would be too long under the system of translation, and also since we lost some time to the previous lecture, so I'll have to think of that. And there's a particular thing that was a coincidence about this. When I spoke in Vallendar in Germany, I added something that I hadn't had before, suspecting that there may be problems in Greece because a person with a Greek mortgage would be having something that it initially expected to pay off in drachmas, which would probably be devaluating, losing value at a certain rate over the years of the mortgage. But under the euro, it would be targeted inflation would be probably much less than what should have been expected for the drachma at the time that this mortgage was done. So things could be out of balance. And I mentioned that as a general problem, and went to the area of the USA. If there were to be reform of the USA, what could be done? And so, but then a little later it came out that there was trouble in Greece, and they went for a bailout. But now, here's some classic things which are good remarks. Maybe general considerations in history. I don't know. I can move from page to page.
So let's pull them. Then let's allow the translation.
General considerations in history. The special commodity, a medium that we call money, has a long and interesting history. And of course, Professor Mundell knows more about this history than I do, but I know there is a history. And since we are so, it went the other way. Since we are so dependent on our use of it, and so much controlled and motivated by the wish to have more of it and not to lose what we have, we may become irrational in thinking about it and fail to be able to reason about it as if about a technology, such as radio, to be used more or less efficiently. We present the argument that various interesting groups, notably including Keynesian economists, have sold to the public a quasi-doctrine which teaches, in effect, that less is more, or that, in other words, bad money is better than good money. Here we can remember the classic ancient economic saying called Gresham's Law, which was, the bad money drives out the good. The saying of Gresham's is mostly of interest here because it illustrates the old or classical concept of bad money, and this can be contrasted with more recent attitudes which have been very much influenced by the Keynesians and by the result of their influence on government policies since the 30s. And then I go on to, this would be nice to cover that, but has some connection with Islamic financing.
Я бы хотела сказать о том, что опять вернуться к Германии и Греции. И то, что я уже говорила о том, что, например, в Греции, когда они перешли на евро, например, человек, который взял уже ипотечный кредит в драхмах, рассчитывал на то, что он будет платить в той же валюте, а при переходе в евро получилось, что он будет платить в евро, а инфляция в евро меньше процент инфляции, поэтому получается он остается как бы в накладе. Также я хотела бы остановиться на общих вопросах и истории. Специальные товар или средства, которые, как мы называем, деньги, имеют очень долгую и интересную историю. И так как мы очень зависимы от денег, и нас контролируют и мотивируют деньги, потому что мы хотим иметь больше или не потерять то, что имеем, иногда мы можем стать даже иррациональными в нашем мышлении из-за этих желаний. И я также хотела бы сказать о различных интересах и различных группах, также об экономистах, которые являются сторонниками Кейнса, которые создали так называемую квазидоктрину, которая учит тому, что меньше это значит больше, говоря другими словами, плохие деньги лучше, чем хорошие деньги.
Digression on the philosophy of money. It seems to be relevant to the politics of state decisions that affect the character of currency systems promoted by states, that there are typical popular attitudes in relation to money. Although money itself is merely an artifact of practical usefulness in human societies and our civilizations, there are some traditional or popular views associating money with sin or immorality or unethical or unjust behavior. And such views can have the effect that the ideal of good money does not seem such a good cause as the ideal of a good public water supply. There's also, for example, the Islamic concept, which has the effect of classing as usury any lending of money at interest. Here we can wonder about what sort of inflation rates might have been typical for any major varieties of money, such as Byzantine money, at the times actually contemporaneous with the Prophet Muhammad.
Я бы также хотела сказать о философии денег, о том, что в некоторых государствах и практически во всем мире деньги иногда рассматриваются не просто как средство в человеческом сообществе и в цивилизации, с помощью которых можно купить какие-то товары или получить какие-то услуги, им приписываются какие-то дополнительные качества, их связывают с грехом, с аморальностью, с неэтическим или несправедливым поведением. И такие мнения привели к тому, что идеальные или хорошие деньги не являются достаточно хорошей причиной. Например, мы не можем говорить, здесь можно сравнивать с водоснабжением, а согласно, например, исламскому понятию, получается, что любой кредит, когда мы выдаем деньги в кредит под какие-то проценты, является ростовщичеством.
In general, money has been associated in popular views with moral or ethical faults, like greed, avarice, selfishness, and lack of charity. But on the other hand, the existence of money often makes it easy to make valuable donations of philanthropic sorts, and the parties receiving such contributions tend to find it most helpful when the donations are received as money. But the New Testament story about money changers being driven from the temple illustrates clearly the idea of putting the evidently mundane and possibly unclean utility of money at some distance from where that money would presumably continue to be received when used as a vehicle for donations. Economics has been called the dismal science, and it's certainly an area of studies where the mundane is appropriately studied. And philosophically viewed, money exists only because humanity does not live under, quote, Garden of Eden conditions, Garden of Eden, unquote, conditions. And there are specializations of labor functions. So we are always exchanging, mediated by money transfers, the differing fruits of our varied forms of labor.
В общем, деньги всегда ассоциировались у нас с какими-то безнравственностью, жадностью, эгоистичностью и другими недостатками. Но с другой стороны, присутствие денег дает нам возможность сделать какие-то пожертвования в филантропических целях. И те стороны, которые получают такие пожертвования, они предпочитают получать их в деньгах. И также здесь можно упомянуть историю в Новом Завете, где также упоминаются люди, которые меняли деньги. Здесь экономика всегда считалась какой-то мирской или, можно сказать, так называемой мрачной наукой. И здесь изучались не божественные, а какие-то мирские, светские темы. И с точки зрения философии деньги существуют только потому, что человечество не живет в Эдемском саду.
My next series where I go into the question of what is the best methodology when you want to achieve a welfare result in the case of a depression or recession. And well, there's a lot that can be said, but I'm going to skip that to save time. But it was interesting that I thought of something about Greece at the time that this preparation was prepared. This is it. I thought about Greece. Transitioning to a more ideal form of money, there can be injustices naturally arising if one conventional norm is being replaced by another in a society. Suppose, for example, in Greece, I thought about this just before the crisis really came to a head and put this in the lecture, that a homeowner or landowner had acquired mortgage indebtedness extending over a period of 30 years with the personal expectation that the value of the drachma involved in measuring his debt before the adoption in Greece of the euro would decrease at the rate of, say, 5% per annum. in comparison with the value of non-paper assets like land or gold. Then, under comparatively sudden transition to the use of the euro instead of the drachma, he or she might be in the situation of expecting only a decrease in the value of the unit of measurement of his or her mortgage debt at the rate of 2% per annum. And this targeted inflation phenomenon, I said in one of my versions, this illustrated the possibility of asymptotically ideal money, that if some source of money is targeting, if they're really targeting its inflation rate, then they will produce to something that would be different from the form of what there has been. Now, there's been no word about targeting in Washington, but some of the currencies like Canada, Australia, New Zealand have had targeting, and New Zealand started it, and London has targeting now, Zurich has targeting, and all these are targeting at 2%. But what is happening in the dollar? Certainly the Zimbabwe dollar was inflating at a faster rate than 2%, but the US dollar is not quite clear how it should be appraised. So the indebted landowner in these circumstances would be suffering a hardship, if not an injustice. And we can raise the theoretical question of whether or not a scheme for reforming a traditionally weak currency should incorporate any special features to make it perhaps more just in connection with the relations between debtors and creditors, specifically in connection with debt contracts dealing with long times of projected debt and payment.
Я также хотел бы вернуться опять к Греции, то, что я говорил о человеке, который мог получить кредит в драхмах, и который, получается, после перехода экономики на евро должен платить эти деньги в евро. Он остается в накладе, так как процент инфляции здесь абсолютно другой, получается 5% при драхме и 2% при переходе на евро. И что делать в таком случае, и является ли так называемая поддержка слабой валюты, которой являлась драхма, с помощью перехода на более сильную валюту, настолько ли она выгодна?
Well, I want to say that this particular PowerPoint version and the others corresponding to other times that I have lectured,
Right.
but this is available on my web page.
Moreover, it will be available on the website of our university, where all students and young scholars and researchers will have an access to your full version of this lecture, and I'm sure they will study it very carefully. Due to the shortage of time, of course, we shall, unfortunately...
There's a series of evolving versions
right.
and other topics, game theoretic topics, and still other topics. And this, my basic web page is at Princeton University.
Princeton University, okay.
Which the web is princeton.edu. And then you can search for it. One way is just search with Google for the web page of me at Princeton. I think that would work.
Yesterday at the plenary session, dear Professor, you mentioned about this usage, wide usage of internet resources, all these technological means, tools to get access to valuable works by our scholars from the West.
Yes,
So
like
therefore...
Wikipedia,
as you mentioned, and even social networks, they allow this interaction of information and information flow all around the world. So let me thank you again for your presence here today.
This networking seemed to generate the revolution in Egypt.
Right. used to say. So, and I think that this phenomenon is still to get researched, to get well studied about the outcomes and implications for further development of the world. So thank you again, and let me again introduce you Professor John Forbes Nash.